When I realised that we were getting close to 50,000 subscribers on this channel, I asked everyone, what do you want to do to celebrate it? Because I think it's worth celebrating. Do you want big balloons and sit and watch me eating cake? And funnily enough, everyone said no, they wanted a full painting tutorial. So sadly, no cake for me. But this is the otter that I've painted and recorded, and I hope you might want to have a go at too. My name's Liz Chaderton. I'm a watercolour artist based in Berkshire, and every week I share a tip, trick or technique that I wish I'd known about ages ago. This little channel has just reached its 50,000th subscriber, and I am hugely grateful to everyone who has joined me on this long journey. I hope you enjoy the tutorial. I'm going to take you through research and planning, how to build up in layers, and how to stop too soon rather than too late. So this is the otter that we're going to be painting. I'll show you how I go about planning a piece. We can do some masking on that whiskery face. I'll show you how I achieve this texture on his lovely bum. We'll really explore how to build things up in layers, knowing when to stop and when to add a little bit more. This otter's going off to the UK Wild Otter Trust. I'm donating it so that it can go into their auction, which I think is taking place about Christmas 2024. If you head over to my website and sign up for my newsletter, I'll let you know more about that as soon as I've got the details. When I know for sure what I want to paint, so in this case I want to paint an otter, I spend a lot of time researching and finding images that really appeal to me. And I always try and use a copyright-free image. If at all possible, I would use my own photography, my own sketches, photography of people who've given me permission. And then I go to the free reference sites. The big downside of places like Pixabay or the wonderful Facebook groups are that other people will use exactly the same photo, and you may end up painting a remarkably similar painting in parallel independently, but it will look like you've copied someone or they've copied you, and that can just bring a load of angst. So what I like to do is amalgamate photos. And anyway, you can never find something perfect for an idea you've got in your head. I saw this otter looking up, really liked its big bottom and its tail, but I wasn't sure about this sort of looking up because it's looking away for you. I found this otter, which I really liked, and I thought, well, I can use those together and come up with something like this. I've changed the shape of the tail. That was certainly the easy bit. And then I need to be human Photoshop. I need to decide where the light is coming from. And especially when you're putting several photos together, it's really important that you have consistent light source. So I do suggest doing a thumbnail picture, something like this, because it helps you plan and think through any issues and make sure that you do that. So if the light's coming over here, we know it's going to be dark around its bottom, basically. I wondered about putting a foot in. Because this otter is on grass, we can't see what's going on. So I would like to put a foot in somewhere, well, not somewhere there, in an appropriate place. So that's sort of like a front paw. You can't see its back paws because it's elsewhere. To make sure the head actually goes on the shoulders, this white marking that they have can help you. And so I've sort of swept it round, and that comes to just in front of the ear. So, and the ear, the eyes, the nose are all in a line. I'm slightly concerned I may have the head a little bit too big on this otter, so I might shave it down by sort of 5%. Nail helps you identify light sources, helps you identify any issues, and helps you plan. And I really think 5 minutes of working it out here is going to be worth a whole lot of heartache. I love Otter's whiskers. I mean, who can't love Otter's whiskers? So I think I'm going to have to mask those out, and I will use masking fluid. I'm not keen on masking fluid, but sometimes it's just what you've got to do. So I'm going to mask these first, start then on the head, travel down the body, use some salt or something to create sort of nice furry bottom. I think that will be quite fun. Then background wise, I'm not anticipating anything more than sort of wafts of colour. Maybe I want to go quite dark here because I've said the light's coming here, that, and dark around the whiskers so that they actually show up. That's dark there. I might also sort of be a bit darker around here to give it sort of weight, again, weight around that big bottom, and then sort of lighter here, lighter there, so that will emphasize that slightly sort of diagonal look. A plan in place. I also need to think about colours. I do not believe that using 48 colours in one painting makes it any better. I think a limited palette really helps. I don't mean using the same colours for every single painting you do, but limiting the number of colours maybe to 5 or 6 for a painting helps bring it together. And I always swatch them out, hopefully on a piece of paper of the same as I'm going to be painting on, just so I can see if they're going to do anything unpleasant or anything surprising, and if there's anything missing. And I'm so glad I did it here, because I thought, I want turquoises and browns. So I chose beautiful phthalo turquoise. That's a Winsor & Newton, and it's a PB16. I chose a warm sepia, so dark brown, could go for a Van Dyke brown or a, I don't know, burnt umber or something like that. A translucent grey, which is a bit of a sort of, I don't know, a shadow shade. It's a black with a bit of phthalo blue in it, which is rather nice. And then I thought, that's pretty transparent, that's fairly transparent. It'd be nice to have some opaqueness in here. So I looked at this cobalt teal. So again, that was good. This tube sadly has dried up, so I've opened the bottom of it to get the last of the paint out. Another rather dried up tube is this, which again is a pre-mix. It's a convenience colour, and it's called Sandstone. It's titanium dioxide with iron oxide, and it's just quite a nice sort of buff colour. So I thought, oh yeah, that's in my head what I wanted to do. And I looked at it and thought, it's all too cool. Needs something to zhuzh it up. And the complement of blue is orange. Have I got an orangey brown I could bring in to give a bit of perk to it? And I tried a couple. So this is Brown Madder, and I tried this one, which is a Rosa watercolour, called a Royal Brown, a PBR 25. So that, and I thought, actually, those 6 together are rather yummy. I just like the strength of this. And if I hadn't swatched them out, I think I'd have only used those colours, and it would have all been a bit samey and a bit too cool. Having decided that's what I'm doing, I have got my piece of paper here. This is Bockingford. It's a knot surface, so it's a cold press surface. It is, shall I tell you what size it is? I think it's about 30 by, oh no, a bit more than that. So it's a half sheet that I've squared off, and that is about 35 by 35 centimetres, which is about 14 inches square. It's all taped down, and I've marked around the edges from the mount that I want to put this in. I just find it far more convenient to have pre-cut mounts, and I paint to a size because I paint pretty prolifically. And if you had to get mounts cut to individual paintings and bespoke framing, it gets too much. So I try and paint to a fairly consistent size. I usually go for a 50 by 50 frame and a couple of different size mounts. So I have marked where that is. HB pencil. And I have got my little reference here, remembering that I think The head needs to go a tad smaller. And now I can start to sketch that in. Sketch fairly lightly. I don't want to damage my nice paper surface. So I think this was a little bit too big, so I think the head is more that size. Right, I need to just have a quick Google to find a decent paw picture that I can put on here of a front paw. You know, double check the number of toes the animal's got. Whatever it is, make sure it's plausible. Because he is a whiskery fellow, I am going to use masking fluid. So really don't like masking fluid. If I can avoid it, I will. But when you're doing a complicated light subject on a darker background, this is really your only option. You can use a brush that you dip in a very strong solution of washing up liquid, dish soap, and that protects the bristles and lets you wash it out afterwards. You can use something like this, which is a colour shaper. It's a little silicone wedge, and when the masking fluid is dry, just peel it off. You could use something like a cotton bud, snip off the end and use that stick for quite fine marks. Maybe we'll do that. Shall I have that ready just in case I decide to do that? Something like that. So all sorts of ways of putting it on. You can get very fine bottles. I find they sort of clog up a bit. I like this Pabio gum as much as I like any of them because it doesn't seem quite so harsh. The problem is sometimes your masking fluid tears your paper as you take it off, especially if you leave it for a while. And that is hugely upsetting and indeed annoying. We need to let this dry fully before we start painting, because otherwise you might pick up some of this masking fluid on your nice watercolour brushes. I say once it's on your brush, you are not going to get it out. Considering, and yeah, I can't bring myself not to, putting some little drops, because these are watery animals, and I think some drops of this would be fun for giving the impression that he's just come out of the water. Now these drops will take a while to dry because they're thick. If you do them, and say this line, I don't like the fact that it's a line, again I'll let it dry and peel it off before I paint and it'll be fine. You will find with your masking fluid, say after, I don't know, a year, 18 months, one day you'll open it and it'll be a congealed lump. It just goes off because it reacts with the air, at which point throw it out, buy yourself a new one. There's nothing you can do about it. We'll let this dry, peel off the bits I don't like, and while we're doing that, I'm off to research front paws. Okay, most of this is dry. Oh, that isn't, so always worth checking. Don't be tempted to use a hairdryer to dry your masking fluid because it can bake it on the paper and make it more likely that it's going to rip. So this is the point where I can just gently rub off anything that I don't like. Those are gone. You can see I managed to find a foot and put that in. I'm going to have to keep remembering to move the paper around because it's a bit big for my camera setup at the moment. I think I got a bit carried away with the dots. So we are good to go, which is very exciting. I've squeezed out the paint into my palette and just mixed it around with some water to make it creamy. I do find that both the cobalt and that sandstone colour really separate out, so I need to keep mixing those in. I think it's just a very heavy pigment and that's why it separates. I've got a size 8 brush, an 8 round, and I've certainly got some bigger brushes to hand. I might use something like that. That's about a 12. Or I might use one of my lovely new mop brushes for the background. That is a size 8 mop brush, or I could use something like that, which is an oval wash. So I have those to hand. Start with the eye, using a little bit of that translucent grey, and the eye really on the otter is nothing more than a dark circle with a highlight. So that's kind of easy, and you can't really see anything over there. So what I've done is that little circle, I'm washing off my brush and just with clean or cleanish water coming around the side. So there are all sort of membranes around there, and painting in where it's dark and then up into the sort of bumps over its eyes. And then I'm going to sort of connect that up and let some of that colour flow, and it can flow down into their lovely little ears. Then I could drop in, that's a bit of the phthalo turquoise, and I am simply paying attention to the tone. I know that otters are not blue. They should be, but they're not. So I am paying attention to the lights and the darks. Remember we looked at those when we were doing this and where it was going to be dark? So that is what I'm concentrating on, behind the ear here, it will be a deeper tone. And whether that's a deeper shade of turquoise or a deeper shade of the grey or some of that brown is kind of immaterial, and mixing those on the surface is beautiful. Now if I stroke the animal in the direction the fur grows, if I get these little white marks where I've skipped some, they will be appropriate. They will look like highlights on clumps of fur, and that will be lovely. Now I'm getting clean water, and again just stroking that animal. That's the front shoulder. This division here is where it goes from the light fur to the dark fur, rather than it going from, this isn't a structure, it's not an underlying sort of anatomical structure, if that makes sense. Just dropping in some of that beautiful royal brown. I think it's a stunning colour. I haven't used it very much, it's quite a recent addition. Now we said this is all going to be quite light here, and then we're going to get darker. This is its shoulder over here. So I might need to make that a bit stronger. It comes down. Again, just stroking the animal in the direction of that fur. Ooh, I think we need some more of that quite opaque turquoise. Just drop some of that in, and it'll sort of sit on top, which is rather nice. But then I might want to be a little more transparent down here. It's going to be dark there, and then we've got a light area as the light is hitting. This is actually its back sort of haunch. I'm going to do a really soft edge there. As it's drying, I'm going to come back and drop in some little bits of that sandstone, just to create some texture and some interest. And then a more dilute version of that sandstone might be quite good for under its chin. And I'll come back and sort that head out in a moment. So I just wanted that to sort of settle down. Connect around here. Again, the light is hitting there, so it will be darker here, and this will merge down into the body. I want to make the inside of that ear a little bit darker while it's nice and wet, so that's all sort of soft and mergy. So I've got a size 16, and we can come and sort out his gorgeous bottom. So we'd said that needs to be light there, and this all sort of merges in, but I quite like just having that sort of softening and coming in there. I'll just move this up to make sure we are totally on the camera. Could spray this area if we wanted to. So it is quite warm in here, and it's going to be drying a bit too quickly otherwise. So I could spray it and then let some of that colour just sort of merge and wiggle and wander. Again, I'm liking how this heavier pigment sort of settles in. It's quite fun. We need this all to merge seamlessly down into the tail area. So let's bring some of that lovely phthalo turquoise down, bring in some of that beautiful brown, bit of that sandstone, a bit of dark tip to its tail. And this is just more with a sort of cleanish brush, just merging some of that. Go back to my smaller brush and let's just address this foot. I'm going to call attention to it by coming in with that lovely reddish brown and just leaving little dry areas along the toes. It's got lovely bumpy toes. Can't see any webbing or any claws or anything like that. I'll just do that a little bit more carefully. I definitely want it to look like a foot, not like some mutant growth. And then while it's wet, let's just drop in a bit of dark. I'm going to clean this brush off and soften this edge, because the otters are just beautifully furry. I've got an idea. I bought, these are little crystals, watercolour crystals, and I've got an orange grey. I've just bought them, and I'm just wondering if I sprinkle it into its bottom and tail, whether it will spread enough to do something exciting. It has phthalo blue and orange in this. Let's have a look. I don't even know how you say that. Pyrazolo quinazoline, which is PO67, and that might just be rather exciting on its bottom. It's not spreading quite enough. Ooh, that possibly is a bit scary. Merge some of that if needs be. It is a little too bright. An alternative, if you want texture on its bottom and tail, is to put salt in there. So salt can be a really variable thing to put in. Sometimes it works a treat, sometimes it doesn't. Works different ways depending on how wet the paper is and what pigments you've got going on. So use with care, use with intention. I'm going to leave its bottom alone, poor critter, and come back to its head. I must be careful not to stick my arm in the wet areas. So I want to get that nostril in. Otters' nostrils are terribly important. I believe they can sort of manually close their nostrils when they're diving and underwater. And the same, I think, with their ears. I have to look that up. I may be misleading you totally. When you're painting animals, it tends to be what you might think of, someone called it this the other day, the wet areas of the animal that's important, and that's sort of eyes and noses. So I'm trying to grab a little bit of the texture. They've sort of got doubles on their noses, and again I'm remembering that the right side is more in shadow, this side is more in the light. I'm very fond of a rigger brush, so I want to sort of put some of the texture of its sort of moustache area here. I'm putting that on with the rigger with clean water, and then I'm going to put some colour in there and hope that will travel through the path of the water in a more natural sort of way than if I just painted that in on its own. So I'm trying to get that texture of the cheek. Only trouble with the rigger is that you don't have a huge amount of control of it. It holds a lot of fluid and it gives you a really expressive mark, but it's not the most controlled thing in the world. You often have to compromise expression for control and things like that, so just decide which is more important to you. And I'm going to shape under its chin. Come round here, damp brush just to smooth some of that off. Again, you'll see as you're using masking fluid that it stops the colour flowing. That's one of the reasons I don't particularly like it, because say it does stop that flow of colour, so you might have to encourage some of that colour to flow over the little bumps of masking fluid. Now this is all in light, so we're only going to capture that side when we paint the background behind it. And with that bigger brush, just getting loose wibbly lines to make it more interesting. Don't want it too busy because the head is further away. Now again, just remember this is only the first layer and we've got lots of time for adjustments and deepening colours or clarifying things. So again, don't worry about that. I'm going to have to come darker on that nose in that second layer. And again, that bump is going to be done negatively. This glow can come round, leave a little bit of highlight there to start. Okay, I think that's going okay. So yeah, I can't do anything more to the nose until that's dry. I want the nostrils a lot darker. To sort that shape out. I think that's got to be a bit darker under the chin to show it's coming down. A little bit of salt up there, only a little bit because his bottom is going bananas. Let me show you what's happening down on his bottom. So much texture there. I don't want it to look like a game of two halves. Okay, I think I would be sensible to let that dry now, and then I can come to the background and adjusting things. Huge apologies for this part of the film. When I came to review the footage, I realised that it had gone out of focus. You can't tell because I'm filming myself, and until you actually go through all the footage, you don't realise there's a problem. And I would have to refilm the entire painting to put this right. Fortunately, this is why I'm doing the background, and I hope you can still see enough of the process. I am wetting the background and then painting around the animal to capture that really light cheek and the edge of its face. I wet the background first and drop the colour in so that it spreads naturally and feathers out through that wet area. If needs be, I take a wet brush and again just pull it in the direction I want. This is what I call wafts of colour. I just let the colour wander and do its own thing. It is nothing specific. While it's all wet, I often drop in different colours so that they merge into the background and use the same colours that I've used in the animal in that background. You can tilt the paper to get the colour to flow in the direction you want, or you can just gently brush it, but try not to overwork it. Now I'm actually using rather a small brush here. I'm only using the 8, and really for the background I should be on the 12 or the 14. Here you can see I'm putting in some grey and letting that mix with the phthalo turquoise that we've already used. You could spatter in some colour to get really nice soft marks as well. We have got those dots of masking fluid there, so it's really important that we put colour behind those dots, because otherwise when we remove them it'll be a white dot on a white piece of paper and it won't show up at all. Please be assured that the focus comes back in just a short time. So I've really cut out loads of this because it was so annoying. But the principle is just as I've done around the head, I do around the rest of the body. If you remember on our planning stage, we said we wanted it quite dark around the head to show up the whiskers. We wanted it quite dark around the base of the animal to really ground it, and that elsewhere it would be a little bit lighter. I think it's good to have a real variety of marks and tones in all parts of the painting. So that goes for the background as well. If I was doing a specific background, I wanted this otter to be in reeds by the water, I would have probably painted that first and then done the animal. But because this is just a very abstract background, I leave it to this point, and then I can use the colours from the animal and pull them out into the surrounds as well. So I hope you can forgive me for this very out of focus background. The background is out of focus, but it wasn't meant to be this bad. I could have cried when I saw this footage, but I didn't, and I'm sure you can still see the principle of what I'm doing. As you paint the background, it's a good opportunity to soften off edges as well. So in any painting, you want some edges to be hard, some edges to be soft. If every edge was soft, this otter might look just like a blob. If every edge was hard, it'll look too cut out. So the soft edges tend to recede and the harder edges tend to call for attention. So we have hard edges round that face and the foot and softer edges round the bottom. I decided that to tie the background in with the animal, I would use a little bit of those sprinkly crystalline watercolours in the background. Not very much, I don't want it to be too busy, but just the tiniest hint of it so that some of that orange and turquoise would appear. You'll be delighted to know that we're back in focus now. Okay, we are dry and it's time to remove any pencil lines you don't want, and of course the masking fluid. You can either use an eraser to get your masking fluid off, or just use your fingers like that, and it can make quite a dramatic difference, especially if you have used tinted masking fluid like I have here. And some of these marks are very clunky, but don't worry about it, we can sort those out. We need to assess what's working, what's not working, what needs changing. And my immediate reaction is, having been so careful about not getting the eye too big, I'm pretty sure I even said, don't get the eye too big. It's actually, I think, a little small, and I think it needs some more emphasis around it. So I'm going to do that. I think the nose needs to go a bit darker. I don't like how those whiskers don't join up, so I'm going to soften those off. Liking this soft edge, got a few hard edges, say around here, that I might want to get rid of. Like how that goes into the background, that was deliberate. Might want to introduce some blue into this haunch round here. Loving all this texture, might want to think about introducing or lifting some of this here, because it's a bit dark and I haven't got that sort of cream that would actually come all the way down here. This would be a lot lighter. I want colour in those whiskers. I probably will introduce some more coloured dots. Quite like these white ones, might soften off some of this. And then this sort of final bit, it's all about not going too far. So do everything for a reason, not just because you've got a paintbrush in your hand. Aim to blend everything, so again you're getting those lovely mix of hard and soft edges. Just go careful in terms of going over whiskers and watch out for that. And a little bit of detail at this point can be quite transformational. We don't want to get fiddly. Well, unless you're doing a very detailed painting, in which case I can't imagine you'd be watching this YouTube. Little bit of detail. Our eyes will read that we've actually put detail all over. So just going back in a little bit is really good. If I were you, I would pay very close attention to hard and soft edges. Like here, I would want to soften that off. don't know whether I will be able to do much up here, because that was phthalo turquoise, which is notoriously staining. So whether I'll be able to soften these marks, I don't know. But soften is probably all it needs, rather than actually removal. Again, I'd just like to maybe soften this edge. I'm going to tone down some of these whiskers with more colour, so let's not worry about that just now. There's a bit of my magic eraser just to try and lift a bit there, and now have some whiskers over there which will sort that. I've lost the sort of oh, what would you call that? Well, it's a shoulder, isn't it? So I need to lift a bit of a highlight here. And there's always two ways of lightening an area. You can physically lighten it, or you can darken behind it, which by contrast will make that area look lighter. So I'm going to actually do both of those there. I'm doing that while it was a bit damp, so I get a more ragged edge or softer edge. So by going darker behind it, having lightened a little, I'm just bringing that edge out slightly. Don't need to go too far with it. I might slightly carry it on down here. Might be quite nice just to separate that tail out there. This is a little dominant and that's a little dominant. So what are we going to do? I think we are going to layer, just checking the direction of our fur. And that will break up that area, and then the direction of the fur here. And I've chosen that cobalt teal because it's an opaque colour and therefore will sit on top and obscure more than if I'd say chosen the phthalo turquoise, which is a very transparent colour. So at this point, knowing a bit about the opacity and behaviour of your paint is no bad thing. I might take a little of that teal into the background. Right, this is the bit I want to do, which is to play with these lovely whiskers, because I said all along that they were such an important part of this. So I've grabbed a little bit of the teal. I'm just double checking the direction of some of these whiskers. I've still got a chance to sort it out if needs be. We've used masking fluid, but we don't have to accept the mark that masking fluid has given us. And at the moment, particularly down here, they look really clunky. And if I didn't touch them up or do anything, they would shout at us and I'd have to shout back. So it is nice to go in to soften them, maybe to tone them down, to add another layer, to elongate them, and just to make them look a lot more natural. Now these whiskers are white on this otter, but we can make them whatever colour we like. The alternative to using masking fluid, if you really hate it, is to get an opaque white and put them in afterwards. Put in darker ones as well. Again, a little bit of a mark. You then soften with clean water, just hopefully enough to break up an area. This is a bit too harsh, this edge. So again, I'm sort of just tickling the edge and slightly softening it. Right, I'm not sure I like what's going on up at this head. So let's just go behind to sort that edge out. Blend that in carefully. I think that will sort that out. Okay, I think all that's left to do is a few very carefully placed spatters. I'm going to protect my otter. Just get a few spatters here. And a few there. And then I need some larger ones, and I will show you how I put larger spatters. I use a syringe. So if you want to spatter in a very deliberate place, and all my spatters are deliberate, you can place them exactly where you want them to be. You can do slightly smaller ones. If you do it high up, it'll explode more. Low down, you'll get a smaller mark. But I see spatters being used so often just to disguise things not working. And I think that you should always use spatters for a reason, to help move your eye round, to maybe say something. In this case, it was all about those water drops. And it's not to give your painting, you know, a nasty case of chicken pox. I'm finding those two white spatters quite obtrusive, so I may actually follow them in just to knock them down a bit. I think I've gone as far with this as I want to. I'll let it dry and then remove the masking tape. One last look and call it a day. So we're at the end of the process. Once everything's dry and I've removed any further marks or things I don't like, I really like to pop it into a mount so that it focuses our eye in. Let me just move it so you can see. Because of its size, it doesn't quite fit on my film setup, but there you go. So we did our research, we found our images, we popped them together to tell the story we wanted. We started with masking and then painted the eye and moved out. We had a whole pile of fun with his big bum. Let things dry, did another layer, let things dry, did another layer. So that was my 50,000th subscriber celebration film. Thank you for being part of the journey, and I hope you really enjoyed this. I hope to see you at 100,000.